Think about the last time you bought a parking ticket. Just really picture it.
Oh man, I can already feel my blood pressure going up.
Right. Did the screen glare make you, like, actively squint to see anything? Were the touch targets so misaligned you ended up canceling the transaction by mistake?
Or you push the button and absolutely nothing happens, so you push it 3 more times.
Exactly. And then you feel that tiny, that spike of adrenaline thinking you're going to get a fine just because the machine was fundamentally impossible to read.
Yeah, that is a universal experience.
But the thing is, you weren't just interacting with a piece of hardware. You were experiencing the downstream effects of, well, a poorly run design team.
Yep, you're feeling the friction.
You were interacting with choices made months or maybe even years prior by people who completely misunderstood the environment their product would live in.
And that's the part we tend to gloss over, right? We compartmentalize design as this purely aesthetic layer, like a fresh coat of paint applied right before a product ships.
But it's just making things look pretty.
Exactly. But what you're describing with that parking meter, that is friction. And friction in the physical world is often born directly from a failure in digital architecture.
It has real-world consequences.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if the typography is too small, or the contrast ratio between the text and the background fails to account for direct sunlight, the user's cognitive load spikes.
Right, their brain is just working overtime.
They aren't just annoyed, their brain is actively expending caloric energy trying to parse bad information.
Which is exactly why we are dissecting this topic today. We have a mission for this deep dive, and it's to completely shortcut the learning curve for anyone navigating this space.
It's so needed, honestly.
It really is, whether you're right at the starting line of a brand new career in design, or whether you're a front-end developer trying to decipher the psychological intent behind the files your design team is handing you.
Or even if you're neither of those things.
Right. Even if you just want to understand the invisible digital mechanics that dictate your physical reality, you are in the right place. Today's exploration focuses specifically on Chapter 02.
Who is this book for?
Yes, Chapter 02. Who is this book for? From an incredible foundational resource called Design User Interface.
It's such a great book. It essentially maps out the entire ecosystem of digital product creation.
It really does. But what makes this specific chapter so compelling is that it approaches the discipline not as, a series of software tutorials, but as a framework for systems thinking.
Yeah, it breaks down the distinct personas involved in creating a product and explains how their disparate priorities have to merge.
Okay, before we get into the psychology of that ecosystem, let's get the reference material into your hands. As always, you are going to want to pull this up.
Highly recommend it.
The book is called Design User Interface. You can find the entire thing at this specific link. It's https://hypeforacademy.gumroad.com/Lee book.
And we've made it even easier than typing all that out.
Way easier. To bypass typing that out, you can buy the book right now simply by scanning the QR code of the book link provided in the description below.
Having that visual reference is going to be crucial as we break down some of the specific user interface mechanics later on.
For sure. And while you're navigating to that description, we want to explicitly request that you follow the show.
Hit that follow button.
Yes, please. If you want more technical design breakdowns and career-building content that goes beyond surface-level aesthetics, following the deep dive ensures you don't miss the architecture we're exploring here.
It's all about going deeper.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because the foundational premise this chapter hits us with, it completely reframes the scope of our digital lives.
It really pulls the camera way back.
Interfaces are no longer just those glowing rectangles on our phones or the monitors on our desks. They are literally the interstitial tissue of modern society.
That's a great way to put it. When we talk about user interfaces, the default assumption is, an iOS app or a SOS dashboard.
Right, something contained in a browser.
Exactly. But consider the actual landscape of your daily routine. You interact with payment terminals at the grocery store. You navigate the complex, and let's be honest, often deeply flawed menu systems on your smart TV.
Ugh, TV menus are the worst.
They're terrible. You adjust the thermostat in your hallway, you use the touchscreen in your car just to turn on the heated seats.
Which is terrifying while you're driving.
It is. And each of these touch points represents a massive collision of hardware limitations, software architecture, and human psychology.
I'll argue that realizing this completely changes how you walk through a city. It's like the Matrix.
Oh, totally. You start seeing the code.
Once you actually notice the volume of different screens you have to physically touch or visually parse just to successfully get a cup of coffee on your way to work, you just can't unsee the intentionality behind them.
You really can't.
You stop seeing a coffee shop point-of-sale system and start seeing the deliberate visual hierarchy that pushes you toward a 20% tip.
Yes, the tipping screens. That is pure UI psychology.
Right, you start wondering about the operational mechanics, like why did they isolate that specific button? Why does this screen feel authoritative while that one feels cheap?
And that shift in perception naturally leads into the ecosystem of creation.
What do you mean by that?
Well, when you're fighting with that clunky point-of-sale system, you aren't just experiencing a technological glitch, you are experiencing organizational friction.
Ah, right, the people behind it.
Exactly. These products are the result of large, intersecting groups of people with completely competing incentives.
It's never just one person in a dark room coding.
Rarely. You have designers aiming for visual harmony, marketers fighting for aggressive conversion metrics, project managers bound by brutal release timelines.
Developers constrained by legacy code bases?
Yep. And as the text playfully notes, an occasional genius CEO throwing a wrench into the whole thing.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, though, wait, doesn't that inherently breed mediocrity?
How so?
Well, we've all heard the phrase design by committee. If you have a marketer demanding a giant red buy now button, and a designer pushing for subtle, brutalist minimalism, and a developer who just wants to use a pre-built component library to save time.
The classic tug of war.
Yeah, the resulting interface usually feels like a compromised mess. How does this source reconcile this collision of skill sets with the creation of actually good products?
By redefining what constraints actually do to the creative process. A lot of early career professionals enter this field with a highly romanticized vision of design as a solitary, purely artistic pursuit.
Like they're painting a masterpiece.
Exactly. They view the developer's technical limitations or the marketer's conversion goals as enemies of their art. But the reality and the core argument here is that great digital experiences are forged in that friction.
So the friction is actually necessary.
It's vital. A designer who understands that the marketer needs an isolated call to action can utilize color theory and white space to make that button prominent without destroying the visual elegance of the page.
So the constraints force a higher level of problem solving.
Precisely. Which brings us to the core promise of this analysis. The goal here is to decode those building blocks.
Right, we want to give you, the listener, the analytical tools to not only spot these mechanics in the wild, but to leverage them.
And if we're going to talk about the primary architects of these experiences, we have to start with the designers.
They really are the tip of the spear, and if you're just starting out as a designer, your primary objective is to accelerate your competency, right?
Absolutely. You want to bypass the years of creating interfaces that look good on a dribble portfolio, but fail catastrophically in the hands of a real user.
Let's contextualize the scale of experience we're drawing from here. The foundational knowledge in this chapter was distilled from 15 years in the industry.
15 years is a lifetime in tech.
It is, and spanning over 500 distinct projects. And the spectrum of those projects is wild. The book talks about everything from fintech portals to pregnancy trackers.
Just think about the cognitive whiplash required to design for those two extremes.
I mean, they couldn't be more different.
Exactly. A fintech portal is a high-stakes, data-dense environment. Users are managing their livelihoods.
Yeah, you don't want any ambiguity there.
None. The design language must project absolute security, utilize dense data visualizations that don't overwhelm the user, and ensure that a misplaced decimal point is virtually impossible.
And then the pregnancy tracker?
Conversely, that requires a completely different emotional tenor. The user flow needs to be deeply empathetic, the visual language softer, accommodating a user who might be highly emotional, physically exhausted, or seeking reassurance.
But the underlying mechanics of good UI apply to both, right? Even if the execution is diametrically opposed?
Exactly. The rules of human cognition don't change, just the application.
Okay, here's where I want to push back a little on the philosophy of skipping the trial and error phase.
Bring it on.
It's explicitly stated in the book that this knowledge was learned the hard way so that you, the reader, don't have to repeat those mistakes. But isn't the act of making a mistake the exact mechanism by which a beginner truly internalizes a lesson?
I see where you're going with this.
Like, if you just hand someone a template of best practices, don't you end up with a generation of designers who only know how to mimic rather than solve problems?
That's a valid concern, but we have to distinguish between heuristic failures and creative risks.
Okay, break that down for me.
Making mistakes is absolutely an essential part of the design process. You build a prototype, put it in front of a user, watch them fail to navigate it, and iterate.
The scientific method applied to visual communication.
Exactly. However, repeating avoidable foundational mistakes is just an egregious waste of time.
Give me a concrete example of an avoidable foundational mistake versus a valuable creative failure.
Okay, a valuable creative failure is attempting a radical new navigation structure. Maybe removing the standard top bar menu in favor of a gesture-based system, and discovering that your specific user demographic finds it too abstract.
Right, you took a swing and missed, but you learned something new about your users.
You pushed a boundary, tested a hypothesis, and learned about your audience's mental models.
And the avoidable mistake.
An avoidable foundational mistake is putting low-contrast gray text on a slightly lighter gray background because you think it looks clean.
Oh, I hate that so much.
Everyone hates it because it completely ignores the WCAG accessibility guidelines and basic optical science. Or making touch targets on a mobile screen 20 pixels wide.
Just untackable.
Completely ignoring Fitts' law, which dictates that the time required to move to a target area is a function of the ratio between the distance to the target and the width of the target.
In other words, human thumbs are a certain size.
Exactly. We have solved the math on how big a button needs to be. Forcing a junior designer to discover Fitts' law through angry user feedback isn't a rite of passage. It's a failure of education.
So the goal is to provide a solid ground to improve from. You want to make new, interesting mistakes that push the medium forward, not the boring usability errors that were solved a decade ago.
Precisely. You establish a baseline of fluency. And the toolkit required for that fluency involves good practices, quick and dirty safe hacks, and what the book refers to as intentional rule bending.
Ooh, let's dissect intentional rule bending. It sounds great on a resume, but in practice, how do you differentiate between a designer who is intentionally bending a rule and a designer who simply doesn't know the rule exists?
That's the million-dollar question. It really comes down to predictability of outcome.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the true mark of moving from a novice to an expert in visual design is understanding the psychological intent behind a rule. Take grid systems, for example. A novice breaks the grid, and the layout looks sloppy, disorganized, and causes the user's eye to wander aimlessly because there is no visual anchor.
It just looks broken.
Right. An expert breaks the grid to create deliberate tension. By placing an element slightly off axis, they disrupt the user's cognitive fluency just enough to force them to stop scrolling and pay attention to that specific element.
Ah, so they bend the rule to bump up readability and aesthetic engagement.
Exactly. It's controlled chaos.
Let's ground this theory in the visual evidence provided in the source material. We have access to several high-fidelity interface designs in the book that perfectly illustrate these mechanics. I want to start with the crypto wallet application UI.
Oh, that's a brilliant example. When you analyze this crypto app, you are basically looking at applied behavioral economics.
The immediate impact really comes from the color palette. The entire interface is built on these incredibly deep, rich blue gradients.
Yes, and that is very intentional.
But why lean so heavily into that specific spectrum? I mean, it's not a playful, energetic yellow or an aggressive, urgent red. It feels like navigating a digital ocean at midnight. Why does decentralized finance require that exact psychological cue?
It is entirely about mitigating risk perception. Let's look at the evolutionary psychology of color and how it intersects with modern finance.
Okay, getting deep here. I love it.
Humans possess deep-seated associations with certain wavelengths of light. Short wavelength colors, like deep blues, are environmentally associated with open skies and clear water.
Spaces that signal long-term survival and stability.
Exactly. Now compare that to the volatile, deeply unpredictable space of cryptocurrency, where assets can fluctuate wildly and transactions are irreversible.
Right. The user's amygdala is inherently on edge.
It's screaming at them. If you design that interface with vibrant, chaotic colors, you compound that anxiety. A deep, 400 nanometer wavelength blue isn't just a stylistic preference. It acts as a visual anchor.
It screams institutional reliability.
Yes. The interface has to provide the grounding force that the asset class itself lacks.
That makes so much sense. And the precision applied to the data visualization within that blue environment is striking. The graph lines indicating currency fluctuations aren't jagged or chaotic.
No, they're rendered as incredibly smooth, mathematically perfect curves.
But the element that truly demonstrates intentional design is the numerical keypad used for entering the transaction amount. The typography on those numbers is massive, crisp, and surrounded by an ocean of negative space.
That right there is cognitive load management in real time. Think about it. When a user is transferring thousands of dollars across a blockchain, their working memory is taxed.
One wrong digit and the money is gone forever.
Gone. If the interface is cluttered or if the numbers are cramped, the visual noise competes with the user's internal focus.
So by utilizing massive negative space around highly legible typography, the designer removes all visual competition.
Exactly. They create a frictionless tunnel between the user's intent and the system's input. It prevents catastrophic user errors, like accidentally tapping an extra zero, because the touch targets are unmissable and the feedback is immediate.
Let's pivot to the second major visual example provided for designers, because it applies these same principles of precision to a completely different psychological goal. The e-commerce detail screen for the Shifty Boa White 2019 snowboard boot.
A completely different beast.
The Crypto app was designed for security and risk mitigation. This screen is designed for pure persuasion.
If the Crypto app is a bank vault, this e-commerce screen is a high-end retail showroom. The visual hierarchy here is meticulously tuned to drive a purchasing decision.
The snowboard boot itself dominates the real estate. It's massive, floating on a deeply subtle, clean background. It doesn't look like a photograph, it looks like an artifact.
It's heroized.
Yes, but the mastery is in the actionable areas below it. The spacing between the size selection and the color selection is pristine.
Notice how your eye moves through that space. It's a masterclass in the von Ristorff effect.
Also known as the isolation effect, right?
Exactly. Which predicts that an item that stands out like a sore thumb is more likely to be remembered. The designer has stripped away every non-essential element.
There are no competing banners, no aggressive sale tags cluttering the immediate visual field.
This creates cognitive ease. The brain processes the information rapidly. This is the boot, this is the size, this is the color.
And then your eye inevitably lands on the Add to Cart button. It is a vibrant, undeniable red. It spans nearly the entire width of the screen. You literally cannot miss it.
That button is the culmination of the entire page's architecture. The vast white space above it acts as a funnel, directing visual momentum downward until it hits that solid block of high contrast color.
It's almost magnetic.
It really is. It demonstrates that combining foundational rules like Fitts' law for button size and the isolation effect for color contrast with the deep aesthetic care yields highly effective, highly lucrative products.
The design is doing the heavy lifting, so the user doesn't have to think. They only have to act.
It's functional beauty.
But here is the brutal reality of the tech industry. A beautiful design file is nothing more than a theoretical concept.
Sad but true.
It generates zero revenue and provides zero utility until it is built. And that brings us to the great crossover, transitioning from the designer dreaming up the interface in Figma or Sketch to the developer who has to actually write the architecture to bring it to life in a browser or an app store.
This handoff is arguably the most notorious friction point in digital product development.
Oh, the designer-developer tension is legendary.
The empathy gap between design and engineering is massive. The source material addresses this head-on, advocating for a fundamental cross-pollination of skills.
The assertion is that every designer should understand the constraints of code, and every developer must understand the psychological intent of design. Just walk a mile in each other's shoes. It sounds great in a corporate synergy workshop, but practically, how does a front-end developer learning UI design actually impact the bottom line?
It's not just fluff. The text focuses heavily on two tangible outcomes for developers who achieve this fluency: speeding up implementation and radically raising the quality of the final product.
Let's break down the mechanics of why that happens, starting with the concept of implementation speed.
Okay. When a front-end developer receives a design file, they have to translate visual elements into the document object model, or DOM, and write the CSS to style it.
Right.
If they lack design fluency, they view the design purely as a list of aesthetic demands. They don't understand the why behind any of it.
So if a developer sees a highly specific, multi-layered drop shadow beneath a card component, and they don't understand design theory, they just see a giant pain in the neck to code.
Exactly. They look at that complex shadow and think, Writing the custom CSS for this will take 20 minutes and might cause rendering lags on mobile browsers. I'm just going to use the default flat browser shadow. It's faster.
And from a purely utilitarian standpoint, they aren't wrong. A shadow is a shadow. The card still functions. Why does it matter?
It matters because that specific shadow wasn't just decoration. It was a carefully calculated mechanism for visual hierarchy.
How so?
In UI design, elevation, how far an element appears to float above the background, tells the user what is interactive and what is static. A complex shadow mimics real-world physics, drawing the user's attention and signaling clickability.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so when the developer flattens that shadow to save 20 minutes, they flatten the hierarchy of the entire page. They degrade the user's intuitive understanding of the interface.
And when the designer sees that flattened shadow in the staging environment, they flag it as a bug.
And then you enter the endless loop of QA tickets, Slack arguments, and revisions.
Which completely destroys the implementation speed.
But if the developer possesses design fluency, they understand the psychological necessity of that elevation. They know the why.
They take the extra time to code the CSS correctly the first time because they recognize that compromising the shadow compromises the user experience.
Exactly. There's a specific phrase used in the text to describe a developer who operates on this level. They call them a conscious developer.
So what does this all mean? I find that phrasing fascinating. It implies that standard development is somehow unconscious or purely mechanical. What elevates a developer into consciousness?
It's the transition from translation to interpretation. A mechanical developer simply translates pixels into code. A conscious developer gains a meta-level understanding of what they are building.
They see the forest, not just the trees.
Right. They recognize that they are not just constructing a digital layout, they're constructing a cognitive environment for a human being. This is framed as a massive competitive advantage, especially for junior developers.
I'd argue it's the fastest way to bypass the junior phase entirely. If you enter the industry just taking orders and matching hex codes, you are easily replaceable.
Highly replaceable.
But if you can look at a design, identify a flaw in the user flow, and proactively suggest a technical solution that preserves the designer's intent while improving performance, you become a strategic partner.
You stop making the historical industry mistake of shipping products that look structurally different in the browser than they did in the design file.
And this alignment between design and development is exactly what allows a product to reach the market intact.
But a perfectly coded, beautifully designed interface sitting on a server somewhere is useless if no one interacts with it.
True. You have to convince human beings to adopt it, to trust it, and to integrate it into their lives.
Which drags us out of the production environment and straight into the brutal realities of the business side. We're talking about the startup founders fighting for survival and the marketers fighting for attention.
Let's start with the founders, because they face a very specific existential dilemma: attempting to build a product and prove its viability on a highly constrained budget.
It's tough. The standard methodology dictates building a minimum viable product, or MVP, to test your core assumptions.
The problem is that founders constantly conflate minimum with shoddy.
Oh, all the time.
They throw together an interface that technically functions but looks like an Excel spreadsheet from 1995, push it to a test group, and wait for feedback.
And the source material vehemently rejects this approach.
It argues that a professionally built prototype one that adheres to high aesthetic and usability standards provides vastly superior insights about product market fit than a half-baked wireframe.
And it makes perfect sense because the half-baked approach is a fundamental misunderstanding of how data collection works in product testing.
Right. Product market fit is about determining if users actually value the core solution you are providing. Will they pay for this tool? Does it solve their problem?
But human beings do not evaluate utility in a vacuum. We evaluate utility through the lens of experience.
Imagine you've invented a revolutionary new pasta recipe. The flavor profile is going to change the culinary world. But for your initial taste test to secure funding, you serve it to investors cold, slopped onto a flimsy paper plate, and hand them a plastic spork.
Yikes. The underlying value of the recipe is completely obfuscated by the delivery mechanism.
The investors can't taste the brilliance of the food because their sensory experience is actively repelling them.
Exactly. When they tell you they won't invest, you might assume your recipe is bad. But your recipe wasn't the problem. The paper plate was the problem.
A poorly designed, ugly MVP is the digital equivalent of that paper plate. It introduces a massive confounding variable into your data.
It really does. When a user abandons your app, you have no idea if they abandoned it because your core business idea is flawed or simply because the buttons were too small to tap and the text was unreadable.
You've gathered useless data.
This dynamic establishes what we can call the economy of trust. The text is very explicit about this, stating that people buy into a product or service with their eyes first.
We are notoriously shallow creatures when it comes to digital first impressions. It takes milliseconds for a user to evaluate a web page and decide if it's credible.
It seems shallow, but it's actually an incredibly sophisticated evolutionary survival mechanism adapted for the digital age.
How so?
In the physical world, we use rapid visual cues to assess danger or safety. Is that animal a threat? Is that fruit safe to eat? We apply that exact same rapid cognition to digital environments.
We use visual aesthetics, alignment, typography, color harmony to rapidly assess institutional reliability and security.
The formula presented here is straightforward. Establish a pristine first impression to bypass the user's initial skepticism, pair that with an excellent value proposition, and you capture the market.
Let's analyze how this economy of trust functions under pressure, looking at the train ticketing app design provided in the source material.
That's a great example of high-stakes UI.
Catching a train in a major metropolitan area is an inherently high-stress activity. You are navigating crowds, you are anxious about the departure time, you are worried about finding the right platform, and you are anticipating the friction of the ticket inspector.
Your cognitive load is already near capacity. If the app you are using to manage this process is cluttered, visually chaotic, or difficult to navigate, it pushes you over the edge into active frustration.
The app becomes another source of stress rather than a tool for managing it. But look at how the design of this specific app acts as a physiological antidote to that stress. The interface is remarkably restrained.
The map functionality at the top doesn't look like a hyper-detailed, overwhelming street grid.
Right. It utilizes incredibly soothing, soft green and blue tones. It abstracts the complexity of the city into a peaceful, manageable visual element.
And it prioritizes the exact piece of information the user needs at that precise moment of peak anxiety, the QR code for the ticket.
It is front and center, housed within a crisp white card. But the masterful touch is the bright green banner positioned directly above the code that reads, "Your train is riding on time."
That green banner is worth its weight in gold from a user experience perspective. It provides immediate, undeniable visual reassurance.
The typography is bold and legible. The visual hierarchy answers the user's internal panic before they even have to articulate it.
By making the digital interface feel deeply manageable and reassuring, the app actively downregulates the user's stress regarding the physical world action.
The design generates trust, and that trust ensures the user will never use a competitor's app again.
Which transitions perfectly into the other half of the business equation, the marketers, or as the text playfully refers to them, the marketing and social media ninjas.
If founders are using design to build trust and prove viability, marketers are using design as a mechanism for behavioral manipulation in the most positive sense of the word.
They use it to drive action.
The text makes a fascinating claim here, noting that even the smallest, easy-to-implement design tweaks can radically drive conversion and readability up.
For a marketer, conversion is the only metric that matters. Did the user click the link? Did they subscribe to the newsletter? Did they complete the checkout process?
And the barrier to conversion is almost always cognitive friction. The goal is to cultivate happy, engaged users, and you achieve that by systematically eliminating visual roadblocks.
We tend to think of roadblocks as technical failures, a broken link, a server error. But a visual roadblock is just as devastating.
The text introduces the concept of visual wrapping. It promises to show you how to wrap your content visually so it's easily understood and possesses that premium look and feel that commands trust.
Let's dig into the mechanics of visual wrapping. What exactly is happening in the brain when content is wrapped correctly?
Visual wrapping is essentially applied cognitive psychology. It's how you package information to maximize cognitive fluency, the ease with which the brain processes information.
It involves the strategic use of white space to let text breathe, preventing the eye from feeling overwhelmed.
It relies on strict alignment principles, so the user's gaze flows naturally down the page without jarring horizontal jumps.
And it means utilizing high-quality, authentic imagery instead of generic stock photos that trigger banner blindness.
When information is wrapped with this level of care, the brain processes it faster and categorizes it as premium. And in the digital economy, premium equates to safe.
Think about your own behavior. If you land on an e-commerce site that looks like it was hard-coded in 1998, the text is misaligned, the banners are flashing, the contrast makes your eyes hurt you. Intuitively refuse to input your credit card information.
The product they're selling might be incredible, and their back-end encryption might be military grade, but the visual wrapping screams unreliable.
The visual wrapping triggers a loss of trust, and the conversion dies instantly.
The source material actually throws a direct, interactive challenge at the reader to prove this point, and I want to pose it directly to you listening right now.
Ooh, a challenge.
It asks, which button do you think will have more conversion? Now imagine these two options. Option A is a flat, dull gray button, unaligned with the text above it, featuring tiny, low-contrast font that just says Submit.
Gross.
Right. Now, option B is a vibrant, carefully padded button utilizing a color that contrasts beautifully with the background, featuring clear, actionable text like Get Started Now, and utilizing a subtle drop shadow that makes it look physically tactile.
It's not a trick question, and it doesn't require a degree in design to answer. It relies entirely on human nature. We naturally gravitate toward clarity, visual affordance, and safety.
Option B wins every single time because the visual wrapping removes the cognitive friction of deciding what to do next.
Okay, so we've mapped out the ecosystem. We've covered how designers build the architecture, how conscious developers bring it to life, how founders use it to prove value, and how marketers use it to drive conversion.
But what if you exist completely outside of that tech bubble? What if you work in human resources, or you're a high school teacher, or a civil engineer, or a chef?
Why should you dedicate mental bandwidth to understanding the mechanics of UI design?
The text anticipates this and includes a final catch-all category of people this knowledge is for, the curious type. And this section elevates the entire conversation from a technical breakdown into a profound philosophical argument.
It broadens the scope of digital design to include absolutely everyone who uses digital products.
They argue that understanding these mechanics grants you critical thinking and the knowledge of what to look for.
But if we take that further, this raises an important question. How does recognizing the precision of a digital interface change how we navigate the physical world?
Because the source makes a massive, incredibly bold leap here. It claims that acquiring this specific type of critical thinking will allow you to get better at all the other aspects of what you do, even if it has absolutely nothing to do with pixels displayed on a screen.
This is where the underlying philosophy clicks into place.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The text states, precision and aesthetics can go beyond that, right into our real world, and I absolutely love that they trademarked real world there.
It is declaring that design is not just about decoration or software efficiency, it is a fundamental philosophy of intentionality.
The core thesis is that planned action, precision, and deep care should go into everything we do in life.
It is about systems thinking. Once you train your eye to recognize and appreciate the meticulous care taken to align a digital button, or the psychological empathy required to pace a user journey in an app, your baseline for acceptable experiences shifts.
You begin applying that exact same standard of care and intentionality to your physical environment.
If you're a chef, you start thinking about the user experience of your menu design and plate presentation. If you're a teacher, you start thinking about the cognitive load of your lesson plans and the visual hierarchy of your classroom whiteboards.
To truly illustrate this bleeding of digital aesthetics into physical reality, we have to look at the final set of images provided in the source, the interface for a meditation and breathing app. This is the ultimate synthesis.
It is a piece of digital software explicitly designed to alter the physical human nervous system.
It is the perfect bridge. The entire utility of a meditation app is to initiate a physiological change, to lower the user's heart rate, to calm their erratic breathing, to shift them from a state of sympathetic nervous system arousal, fight or flight, into a parasympathetic state of rest and digest.
The digital design must facilitate that highly physical change.
And when you analyze these specific screens, the visual choices are remarkably deliberate in their pursuit of that goal. The UI elements are not contained within harsh, rigid boxes.
They are rendered as soft, floating organic shapes.
The color palette abandons the high contrast urgency of an e-commerce site for an incredibly gentle, muted transition of aquamarines, soft blues, and washed-out purples. It visually mimics the calming environment of dawn over a quiet body of water.
But the true physiological connection happens in the interactive elements. Notice the progress circles on the breathing practice screens.
They aren't harsh, rapidly ticking timers that induce panic.
They are glowing, soft-edged rings that slowly expand and contract.
They mimic the physical expansion and contraction of lungs.
Exactly. The design is actively attempting to regulate the user's real-world respiratory rate by providing a visual rhythm that models a calm physical state. The user subconsciously synchronizes their breathing to the animation.
It is behavioral biology rendered in pixels. The interface is quite literally reaching out of the screen and actively soothing your physical body.
It is the most pristine example of how digital aesthetics and planned action directly impact the physical world.
And that interconnectedness, the fact that a line of CSS and a hex code can alter your heart rate, is what makes understanding this entire discipline so vital.
We are being continuously shaped by these digital interfaces just as much as we are shaping them.
Which brings us to a final, slightly unsettling thought for you to carry with you today. We have spent this entire deep dive exploring how precision, intentionality, and deep psychological care in digital design create frictionless, trusting, and physically calming experiences.
We have established that the digital world is becoming increasingly tailored to reduce our cognitive load to near zero.
So if interacting with these highly precise, carefully planned digital interfaces is actively training our brains hour after hour to expect seamless, perfectly logical, fictionless experiences, how will this fundamentally change our tolerance for the inherently flawed, poorly designed systems we encounter in the real world?
It's an impending collision. As our digital environments approach a state of highly optimized perfection, the innate friction of the physical world is going to become increasingly intolerable.
Think about it tonight. After a week of navigating beautifully intuitive apps where everything behaves exactly as you expect, how much patience are you realistically going to have when you walk into a poorly laid out grocery store where the signage makes absolutely no sense?
Or, more critically, how much more overwhelming and frustrating will it be to try and physically navigate through a confusing, poorly signed hospital wing when you are already dealing with real-world stress?
We are raising our baseline expectations for how systems should treat us, and the physical world is struggling to keep up.
The contrast between digital elegance and physical chaos is only going to widen. Recognizing why that contrast exists is the first step in demanding better physical systems.
Yeah, it is a massive shift in perspective, and it's something to watch out for in your own daily interactions. And with that, you are now armed with the foundational mindset of a systems architect. You understand the invisible forces operating behind the glass.
As a reminder, the incredible source text that served as our roadmap today is from the book Design User Interface.
It is highly recommended reading for anyone looking to move beyond the surface level of this industry and truly understand the mechanics of digital interaction.
Absolutely essential.
You can grab your copy right now by checking the description below and scanning the QR code, which will take you directly to the Hype4 Academy Gumroad link.
And please hit that follow button. We rely on your engagement, and we have a massive lineup of technical breakdowns and career-building deep dives coming your way.
Thank you so much for investing your time and attention with us today, and we will see you on the next deep dive.